I love your backdrop.
Oh, thank you.
Is it real? Of course it is.
Uh, yeah, they're real.
Didn't need to
Yeah,
ask you that.
no, no, no. It's sorry, let me just get this on the screen. Um, it's like an art piece. These aren't like my books that come out, but they're all real books.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Very cool. Thank you for making time to talk
of
with me, Ryan.
course. Yeah.
And my first question to you is, who is Ryan Holiday?
What do you mean by that? You mean
You tell me. I
existentially?
mean, I've read about you, I've spoken to people about you, and what I love is there's a guy in the office here that has a tattoo on his leg because of you. And I didn't know that until 2 hours ago. But who would you say you are when I ask you who's Ryan Holiday?
I would say I'm a person. I like to say I identify as an author. That's what I love to do. I write books about many topics, but the ones I'm most known for is for ancient philosophy. It's kind of been this surreal thing. I mean, it's as an author, you obviously dream of your books resonating with people, but the idea that those things would be tattooed on people's bodies, it's kind of mind blowing, to be perfectly honest. I kind of try to keep a little bit of a distance from it because it makes me, I don't know exactly what to do with it.
I get that. That makes you very humble. I mean, this is a guy called Ryan Hopkins who's been inspired by you. And I think that's the thing that, if I look at how many things you've done, how many people I've spoken to, in some way or other, you've inspired them. And yet I can almost see like the awkwardness with you, like kind of, but as a young Ryan, when you were, growing up, who and what influenced your kind of life and career decisions at that time? I want to know, I want to go through that journey to then
Sure.
when the Stoics and the whole kind of evolution there took place.
Yeah, I would say my introduction to the Stoics was relatively late. It was I think I was around 20 years old, and it was this sort of eye-opening, opening experience. And that it ties into why it sometimes can feel a little weird when people have such a strong reaction to my books, is because I have the same reaction to the Stoics. So what I feel like I'm doing in the books is taking this ancient wisdom that I feel the same way about, and explaining it and illustrating it and putting it all together for people. So like when people have really strong reactions to the books, I kind of know what they're talking about. It just doesn't feel
Sure.
like it has anything to do with me. Does that make
It
sense? Like
does, yeah.
it's like I wrote a script to a movie that was based on a very good book that I didn't write. And so my relationship to it is somewhat removed. It's like this thing that's deeply meaningful in my own personal life, and then I have this kind of professional relationship to. And I don't know if there was anything in my childhood necessarily that sort of set me on that course. I loved writing, I loved books. I just didn't know that writing was like a job that you could do. None of my parents' friends were, authors, or really did anything kind of creative. And I don't know if, when I was reading books in English class, I was thinking, oh, I could do this. I don't think anyone thought that.
That's interesting to me because where we parallel each other in some ways is both entrepreneurs. And yet I was really unstimulated at school, and I didn't actually have that mindset from a young age that I could do what my passion was, and to
Yeah.
then therefore try and find it. And it feels like that's what happened to you. And actually, you left university, you left uni at like 19, and yet I'm going to call you a genius, an intellect, and yet the system kind of failed you, right? You had to go and find yourself to then come back in. And now look how you're educating people and writing all these amazing books and all these amazing things, right?
Well, what I did was I left college to go do a different kind of education. I went and I was a research assistant to a very great writer named Robert Greene, who I continue to learn from to this day. And it was really this question of, do you stay in school and learn how to do it two or three steps removed from people who are doing it, or do you take this chance to go to work and learn from directly from someone who is doing it right now at the level that I wanted to do it and in a way that I wanted to do it? And so I kind of had a very fortunate experience working for Robert, where I learned not just a whole bunch about history and human nature and all these ideas, but I also learned the sort of practical skills of doing the job that is being a writer.
I get it. And this is interesting, right? So here in the UK, it costs a fortune to go to university. So people
Sure.
here,
It's not cheap here either.
Hey?
It's
Yeah,
not cheap here
exactly.
either.
So
Yeah.
45, 50,000 pounds, you know, you could be coming out. Whereas actually the apprenticeship route, like going and seeking a mentor, Robert Greene, and I was going to actually ask, you know, like, and actually now people are clearly seeing you as that. And although you leave your ego out of this, and that's another question in itself, it's like that whole thing of educating yourself around people with lived experience, that apprenticeship side of things. Why is that not more commonplace? The education system, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree, seems a bit archaic and not fit for purpose. When if you're driven and motivated, you find someone you can learn from, you find people, your tribe, and then you take that information.
Yeah, Orwell said something like, you know, I've never met a blacksmith who wasn't an apprentice first. There's just certain trades or lifestyles or approaches that you can really only learn from another person. You can't learn it in a classroom. You can't learn it from a book, and you need to really figure out how it works, and it takes longer. I think maybe people think that an apprenticeship is a shortcut, and in some ways it is, but in other ways it really isn't. I mean, I worked for Robert for 7 or 8 years. And my first book came out like 6+ years into that relationship. So much longer than a college education would typically take. And that was, you know, specializing in something very clear. He wasn't also teaching me algebra and a foreign language or something. So it's both a shortcut and a more arduous process. But what you're really learning is how to do the thing, and you're learning how to do it well. And you're also seeing it modeled in someone, as opposed to like the I never had any doubt that Robert knew what he was talking about, because it was there in the evidence. Whereas, you know, I think a lot of people, they sit in class and they listen to the teacher or the professor, and they're just sort of like, why should I listen to this person? What authority do they actually have to tell me that this is the way that it goes? They don't know that.
No, I get that. What's interesting about this specific conversation is bringing up the Stoics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so we just talked about the importance of the lived experience and being there in the presence of, and then key part of your kind of almost identity, if you like, and what you write about is basically values and what we can learn from people that are no longer here at all. And
sure.
the relevance rings true. And I wanted to ask you, one, how do you inspire that from an adult or a child in the classroom, right? To kind of get the relevance of like, well, these guys lived ages ago. The world was different. We had no smartphones. We had no this and that. And also, out of the 4 values, and I'd love you to tell me what they are any of them waning or struggling in current society more than the other, where there's, you know, misinformation and so there's a lot there. Sorry, but
yeah, no, I get it. I think, look, if you're trying to sell philosophy to a young person, I don't mean like literally sell. I mean, if you're trying to convince someone who's not interested in philosophy why they should be interested in philosophy, and you go, okay, look, it's a bunch of old dead white guys who lived a long time ago, whose names you can't pronounce, who kind of just walked around Athens or Rome, and they came up with some interesting ideas. You know, people's eyes sort of glaze over and they go, what does that have to do with me? But if you go, hey, let me tell you about some insights from the emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the world. That's Marcus Aurelius. Or you say, okay, maybe you're not interested in that. Well, let me tell you about the insights of Epictetus, a slave in that same empire who endures not only horrific torture and subjugation, but then is ultimately exiled. Yet he becomes so influential and wise that he teaches the emperor of Rome. Or I go, let me tell you about Seneca, who's the most famous playwright in Rome and its most prominent philosopher and its most powerful politician besides the emperor. You know, suddenly you go, oh, okay, these are these are doers. These are people who are operating in the world who also happen to have a philosophical framework. And that's what gets me excited about philosophy. And that's what I tend to talk about. And that's just what I've noticed will resonate, particularly with young people, and then with young men most of all, is the idea of philosophy being this sort of, you know, subtle thoughts that you have, or these interesting thought experiments. People go, I don't have time for that. What is that? What am I supposed to do with that? But if you can present philosophy as a tried and true operating system for people whose accomplishments are undeniable, whose impressive lives, and I don't mean that in the sense of accomplishments, I just mean they were good, admirable people. If that's indisputable, then suddenly there's an openness to hearing about the philosophy that, you know, isn't going to be there from a university professor.
Yeah, I get it. And in your opinion, and in context of that standing the test of time, because I mean, let's be honest, if you flip it to like religion, so I can see why someone that was living in the plains of Africa when there was a mega tropical thunderstorm, you know, and you kind of you put a reverence to that. You know, the leopard that drags someone out of their camp, and someone is a leopard god. I can see that. I'm well traveled. I've been all of that, and you can see the not just the passion, but the faith that goes with everyone's got a religion. But and this is just my viewpoint, I'll make that clear now. But you know, the reality is it doesn't feel like religion has stood the test of time. You can see some cracks and so on. Whereas values, this is just my opinion, the value side of things, how we live, how we want to be the best versions of ourselves, and so on. It feels like that stood up.
Yeah, well, look, human nature hasn't changed. So the fundamental problems we're trying to address, and then the greatness that each of us has inside us that we're trying to reach. This has been the perennial pursuit of philosophy as well as religion. And I've always found it fascinating. You know, the cardinal virtues of Stoicism are courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. And anyone who's been in a Catholic church, those might sound familiar because those are also the cardinal virtues of Catholicism and I guess Christianity at large. The idea that these different philosophical schools, these different traditions, all kind of settle in around the same handful of core ideas, I think is pretty illustrative. What just I like about Stoicism is even the idea, you know, of realizing that when Marcus Aurelius is introduced to the Stoics as a young man, a few years, you know, roughly the same age that I was introduced to it, and I think, oh, this ancient philosophy is so interesting, so practical. You know, he had the same reaction. And I don't just mean he thought it was interesting and practical. I mean, Stoicism was ancient to him. Like Stoicism was 5 centuries old by the time Marcus Aurelius gets to it. How insane that is. And just to really wrap your head around how long people have been finding value in these ideas and relying on these values, it's a remarkable thing.
I think it's amazing. And one thing that scares me a little bit, I'm sure it's the same as you, like you're an advocate, you've written the Daily Stoic, you're probably the most vocal person I could find about Stoicism. But you have a changing time and advocating reading. I think you said you've read over 3,000 books. It's probably more than that. So, yeah, exactly. Lost count. But I've got 2 daughters growing up that are 13 and 14 now. We encourage them to read because I've always enjoyed reading, and it creates, you know, stimulation, imagination, and of course you become more knowledgeable. But we live in a world now where the smartphone is taking you to Instagram, so if you allow them to have it, and you know, we do, and so many people do, right? And so my question is, you know, is this incredible knowledge and these values going to start getting lost amongst a generation that's grown up where they're basically going on TikTok and there's influencers talking nonsense on there, right? And then, you know, you've got to try and pick through to find Ryan Holiday.
Look, it's a timeless thing. I don't want to dismiss the problems of modern technology because they are considerable, but I was always struck. There's a quote from Blaise Pascal, who's a fan of the Stoics also. He said this in the 1500s. He said, all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. So he wasn't holding an iPhone, but we were still finding things to distract ourselves with, in the 1500s. And in Marcus Aurelius's time, we were doing it. And in Zeno's time, we were doing it. And in Aristotle's time, we were doing it. We've always found ways to distract ourselves and to focus on trivialities over, the substance. In the ancient world, the big debate was between, philosophy and the sophists. The philosophers were people who told unpleasant but necessary truths, and the sophists sort of just told people what they wanted to hear. And I feel like that's a version of what we see play out on social media today. There's people who sort of play to the algorithm, and maybe they become popular. It probably isn't going to last. And then there are people who try to do real substantive work, and they try to use these tools to have a positive impact. I try not to personally use a lot of social media. I find it not to be great for my mental health, but I understand there's enormous audiences there. So I've tried to work out ways that I can translate my ideas there, because I also understand, look, most people don't wake up and want to read about an obscure school of ancient philosophy. Most people don't have time for books at all. And we want to meet people where they are, but we do want to try to direct them towards the things that are going to last and matter, as opposed to just what's kind of flashy and popular right now.
I get that. And actually, just relating that to you, Ryan, you've been able to research and kind of grow your own mindset, your own knowledge banks through everything you've done. Sitting here right now, you will still have that growth mindset, right? You'll still want to be learning and finding out more. What's next for you? Where do you go to keep getting that? Because you've got such a good understanding of so many things, but there's so much more to unravel. Where's that path taking you?
Yeah, look, you think you know about something, and then you realize you're only scratching the surface. I am writing about Abraham Lincoln in the book that I'm doing right now, and I'd probably read, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 pages about Abraham Lincoln in my life before I started, and I thought, oh, I've got everything that I need to know. And I sort of sat down and I was working on it, and it just wasn't coming together. And so I asked for some recommendations. I looked around, I read this book, which led me to another book, which led me to another book. And almost 2,000 pages later, I'm deep down this rabbit hole that I thought I'd already gone all the way to the end on. And that, I just love that. I just love that the more you think you know, the more you're only scratching the surface. There's a quote from the physicist John Wheeler. He says, "As our island of knowledge grows, so does the shoreline of ignorance." And basically what I was bumping up against is I thought I didn't even know the things that I didn't know about Lincoln. And it wasn't until I decided to go deeper down this rabbit hole that I realized, oh, there's all these things that I could explore. And so that's just what I'm doing. I don't have any secret access to stuff that they only let authors do. I mean, I buy books from bookstores and I read them. And then when I don't know stuff, I look those things up, and that turns me on to other things. And it's really, seeing knowledge as this just sort of perpetual process that you commit to.
Yeah.
And you follow it. They say compounding interest is the most powerful force on earth, and knowledge compounds also. And as long as you commit to that process, you keep getting those returns.
So you'll be consistent with that. That's something you've never let up on. And actually, just wanted to ask you, as someone that, again, has such an amazing understanding of that kind of mental strength, what do you do? So writing clearly stimulates you.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you meditate? Do you do breath work? Do you do things that allow you to be better in the moment when you're actually looking to write?
Yeah, I think every writer, every creative person, anyone that does what they call knowledge work needs to have a strong physical practice that balances it out. It could be weightlifting, it could be skiing, it could be running, could be swimming. One of the things, I'm going on this tour right now, and one of the things I'm excited about, I just spent a month in Australia for some talks, was I got to swim every day in like a different swimming pool. And I that's what I'm excited about in November when I'm in Europe for these talks, is the chance to do like my other hobby in different places. And if you're not if you're just sort of getting tighter and tighter mentally, I think you end up breaking. And you got to have a physical practice, and the physical practice, it has other benefits too. I mean, when I'm working on a book, and I hit a wall, or I don't feel like working on it that day, I'm very familiar with that feeling, because that's the feeling that I feel at the beginning of every workout also. I don't want to do it.
No.
It's the feeling at the end of the workout when I have sit-ups or push-ups that I'm supposed to do. I just did a hard thing. I don't want to do another hard thing. But you develop the muscle that ignores that and does it anyway. And that's the muscle that I need when a chapter feels good enough, but I know it could be better.
Yeah, so
Or
you develop a habit. You've
yeah,
effectively developed a habit, and then the times when you do hit that wall, rather than getting all brain fog and frustrated, you'll take yourself off. And I mean, so I know I wanted to bring swimming up, and I
yeah.
know about what you're doing, and I wanted to ask why swimming. But if you're not able to go swimming, will you just go for a walk? Will you get out amongst nature? Will you get a different
I
change of scene?
I run more often than I swim. And running is, of all the exercise you can do it basically everywhere but a prison cell.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I really like running for that reason, and swimming is something I tend to do more when I'm traveling, or when I've got access to something. But yeah, I like walking too. I have a walking practice that I consider very separate from my physical practice. Like, the walk is for mental health exclusively. I
Yeah.
don't care if it has any health benefits, and the running and the other stuff is more clearly physical.
I love that, and making time for it is key. And
Of course.
I was enjoying reading about the whole swimming side, because when you're swimming, you're able to go into a place, but that actually, and I do it myself, but not as much as you, and not traveling, but I try and get at least 2 swims in a week for half an
Yeah.
hour.
Yeah, there's
And after
nothing
10,
else to
15
do.
minutes, I'm in a place that things I'd forgotten about, things I'm going to do. The challenge, actually, I'm sure you're better at this than me, is I forget about a lot of it when I get out of the
Yeah.
pool and I've had a shower. And I'm like, oh, I had so much clarity 20 minutes ago and I've forgotten it. But it's amazing what comes to you when you're doing it, right?
Yeah, and I've tried to remind myself that the point was swimming, not trying to solve a problem in my head that I needed to remember. And so I've tried to give myself a little grace in that regard. But what I love about swimming is that, there's no screens, there's no sound, and the because you're also not looking at the scenery, you're looking straight down. It does do something pretty special with the mind that I haven't found in any other kinds of exercise. When you're running or you're on a bike, you're having to look for cars, and you're having to, you just have to have a kind of spatial awareness that swimming is almost more like a sensory deprivation tank. It's just got a wonderful meditative value to it.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think just the very fact that you brought, when I asked you about the mental simulation, you brought the physical side in. And
Yeah.
we both keep fit, right? But I
Yeah.
go to my gym at home, or I go for a run or a swim, because I know it unlocks this. And I learned that. I'm 46. I hesitate because I'm 47 in next week. And my kids keep calling me 47. But I always kept fit and would get out in nature if I could, and so on, because it felt right. And
Yeah.
I'm probably lucky that I had that gut feeling, because I've learned about it a lot more now and understand that. But keeping fit and being stimulated, and ultimately having purpose.
Yes.
So much of the Stoics and so much of what you write about, talk about, is about having purpose. What is
Yeah.
your purpose right now?
Well, I have two young kids, so I feel like my overwhelming purpose is just, making sure that they're okay, making sure that they become, contributing, fulfilled human beings. I have a spouse, so, I have obligations in my marriage. It's an election year in America. I feel like I have obligations as a citizen. I live in this small town, so I don't live in this enormous city where I feel like I can just pretend things aren't happening. I feel like obligated to sort of be involved and to contribute to a community. And then I feel like I have a purpose and a duty as a person with a set of skills or talent. I think if you're a professional athlete or a writer or an entrepreneur or whatever it is that you feel called to do, I think we have an obligation to fulfill our potential in that regard. I love the parable of the talents in the Bible, the idea that, you've been given this gift, you have to turn it into something. When you turn in the gift at the end, it should be more valuable than when you got it, right? What do you have to show for the time that you have spent with what biology and random circumstance have foisted upon you. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah. And if I was giving you my opinion,
Yeah.
talking to you now, and what you've achieved by 37 years old, I got that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much you've done, and I know you're going to leave your ego out of this. You've even written in the book about that. But the value of time feels like that's come from, again, the Stoics, and you put a huge value in it. And I want to bring death up, and I'm a super positive person, as are you, right? But the reason why I want to bring it up is that the most alive and vibrant people I've ever met have either had some very close to death experience. They've beaten cancer, they've had a car accident, and it's just given them a whole kind of perspective on life. And I'm going to live now. They've been told they're never going to walk again, they're never going to talk again, and then they've beaten it. And then the way they live their life is so purposeful, and they've latched on to like the mental health campaigning, or an awareness around something that they feel they never should have, or someone close to them never should have. Where's that come from? Why is it that human beings only almost need that? They need that shock or that trauma to then feel alive.
In Mark Aurelius's meditations, he talks about this a lot. He's having to constantly remind himself that he's mortal. He's having to constantly remind himself that posthumous fame isn't going to do him any good, that all he has is this present moment in front of him. And we're just really bad at remembering that. We want to believe that death is far away. We want to believe that medicine will do something about it. We want to believe that it happens to other people and not to us. And we don't think about it. And the result is not that it allows us to be present. It allows us to reject the present. When you understand that life could go at any moment, it forces you to deal with what's in front of you and to appreciate it and to make the most of it. If you always think that you have tomorrow, if you always think that you have another chance, you're not going to treat what is in front of you with the seriousness that it deserves. So some people think this idea of memento mori is morbid. I actually think it's really empowering and really powerful. And it has the opposite effect of depressing me. It makes me feel very alive.
Yeah. Because there are people that live in fear, right? And living in fear is not a good place to be. And that could be a fear of dying, and whether that's come from, or just a fear that things aren't going to go right for them, and whatever they do doesn't seem to be working. And then the overall society we're in, which the doom scrolling on Instagram, which is hard, right? And that's affecting youngsters that are going to take that through back to the conversation about habit forming.
Yes.
Harsh question for you, but just would love your perspective.
Okay.
What advice would you give someone that's sort of listening to this now and thinking their life's not going right, and they're talking about people I've never heard of, these Stoics and so on? Where would you let someone develop into in a kind of like, check this out, read this? What one thing would you suggest they get to read that could actually sort of inspire them to move out of that slump?
Well, it's so fascinating to realize that whoever you are, whatever you're going through, like, it's not new. People went through it thousands of years ago, and some of the smartest people who have ever lived have written very specifically about exactly what you're going through. That's what's so powerful and amazing about the Stoics, is on every page, you're like, are they talking to me directly? And that's what's just kept me so inspired and excited about talking about them. So, it depends on who the person is and what they're going through, what Stoic I would point them to. But I would say Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or Seneca's Letters are just two of the most remarkable bits of philosophical thinking that have ever been captured. And you will undoubtedly find some clarity and wisdom in them. And you'll be amazed at the way the centuries melt away, and it feels like they're in the room with you. And I just love that.
I love that. And again, this whole lack of ego, and actually relating this to you, I'm conscious of time here. You're a best-selling author. If you look at all the things you've done, you can attribute it to success. Sitting here now, how do you define success?
I've always said success is autonomy. If you don't have control over your calendar, over what you do and don't do, how successful are you really? And this is a fascinating thing the Stoics talk about. Epictetus is a slave, but he looks around in the court of Nero and he realizes he's freer than a lot of these very powerful people because he doesn't want anything. He's in control of his desires, of his beliefs, of his opinions. He hasn't willingly made himself a slave to something. And So for me, success has got to be some semblance of control of your life day to day, that you're spending your most valuable resource, which is your time, where and when you want to spend it.
I love that. I totally adhere to that. And what I love as well is everything I see and hear about you and just talking to you now. So much, again, let's just relate it to the kind of Instagram sort of scenario of success is
Yeah.
the Lamborghinis behind me, the big house, the whole kind of, can I
Yeah.
just drop in? You don't have any of that. In fact, if anything, you
Thanks.
stripped your life down. There are many, many unhappy, wealthy people in this world.
Sure.
There are many, many people that are striving to make money to therefore think they'd be
Yes.
happy. Whereas it feels to me like despite all the success and ultimately the wealth that you have with that, it's not relevant to you because you've broken it down to, just as you said, I do what I want when I want, which of course you measure that with a certain amount of wealth, but you're not living in a world that you've got all these things around you. How do you
Look,
manage that?
it's nice to have, and the Stoics would say if you can get it, if you've got it, you should enjoy it, but you want to get to a place where you don't need it because it can go away. And in the ancient world, things were much more precarious, right? You could be banished by the emperor, your wealth could be prescribed, you could be executed. And so uh, it's wonderful that the books have sold well, and when I negotiate a contract for them, I don't I try to get as much as I can get paid because I'm negotiating with a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, why I'd rather have the money than they have it. But I try to not let it sort of change who I am or what I value. And ultimately you got to try to do good with it also.
Yeah. You've inspired many, many, many people. Of all the people you've been around, who's inspired you the most from a mentor, from an impact of the things you've read and been around?
Oh, that's I would so struggle to just pick one person, but I would say, professionally having Robert and I write very different books, but watching someone be so committed to their craft and then also be so generous with his time towards me was just, a model that I've tried to you have these mentors and you realize you can't pay it back, you can't pay them back, but you can pay it forward. And that's sort of what Robert taught me.
Yeah, I love that. And just last question for
Yeah.
you. How important is legacy to you? Because the Stoics, you kind of kept their legacy, if you like. So there's a lack of ego in that. But if I reframe that to you, that I've only heard of them, being honest, because of you,
Yeah.
that's not quite true actually. But the learnings I've had from it is, and
Yeah.
you've made it more educational, more relevant to my life, which a lot of
Yeah.
people would say. Is that entwined to your identity, and are you happy with that, or are you trying to be Ryan Holiday, sort of away from that?
No, I mean, it means a lot to me in the sense that that's what I set out to do. I mean, I
And
wanted
you've
to
done
make
it.
this, I wanted to make the Stoics popular and I wanted to pay forward what they'd done for me. So I like hearing that. Legacy, I do feel like the Stoics were right in that, if 50 years from now people are talking about me as some popularizer of Stoicism, what do I give a shit? I'll be dead. And well, hopefully I'll still be around in 50 years. But
Yeah, I was just going to
the point,
say, yeah.
yeah, that's not a high enough number, hopefully. But you never know. I guess the idea is if they if I'm totally forgotten, it won't matter to me because I'll be gone. And if I am more famous, posthumously than I am in life, also don't really care. I like the work that I'm doing and it's satisfying to me. And that's what I want to focus on. And legacy, I feel like you have to see as an extra thing. It's like if you break a record, that's the accomplishment. How long the record stands is not up to you.
Right. That's awesome. And you know
Yeah.
what? In this world of TikTok's the most searched for mental health questions when its influence is giving one for so on. I think we're going to come through a period where people are going to be craving authenticity. I think people are going to go back to this whole actually, this is all just bollocks. Where's the real truths and so on.
Yeah.
I hope that's. I mean, I speak to people like I did earlier that are already in that place, but I think the masses need to get past the novelty of this crazy information out there and influences that no one's heard of to come back to the people that are talking sense and drawing on real values.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
let's
hope so
see.
too.
We both won't know, but I've got a good feeling that your legacy is going to be awesome. And thank you.
Well, if it happens, I'll take it.
Yeah, thank you for making time to talk to me.
My pleasure. Awesome.
Really appreciate it.